They that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. Oh yeah. They shall run and not get weary. They shall walk and never faint.
I was maybe about 5 or 6 years old the first time I heard this song. We were in church. My mom was the first person I ever heard sing this. I don't remember what I was doing before that moment. What I do remember is the sound, the melody, her voice, the conviction in it. Like she was telling the truth in a way that words alone couldn't carry. And my body responded with an assured curiosity. It wasn't the aliveness I knew from running and playing outside, or from riding a bike, or from just being a kid inside his own free-spirited head. This was the aliveness of something moving toward you and through you at the same time. They called it the anointing, the presence of God. And I didn't have any reason to call it anything else. Straight from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 31. I didn't know what waiting on the Lord meant. I didn't know what renewing your strength meant. I was a little kid, but my body knew the song was true. Every February, my mother would sit me and my sisters down in our living room, and we would watch old black Hollywood films. Films where Negro spirituals moved through the story like breathing. She was teaching us something she may not have had full words for herself. Music was never just music. It was history with a fully active heartbeat. It was survival, wearing the clothes of worship. Those films were a window into a world that was segregated and constrained, and still, somehow, full of spirit, full of culture, full of something that hadn't been completely stripped from us, even when almost everything else had. And I watched, and I listened, and something in me started to understand that the song my mother sang, that verse from Isaiah, that anointing in the room, didn't begin in our church. It began much further back than that. Before I left South Carolina, after finishing my undergrad degree in music from the oldest historically black college or university in South Carolina, that means before grad school, before New York, before any of the wellness work that I do now, I sang a solo in church. It wasn't this one. The spirit was high in the place. I don't remember which song it was, but what I do remember is what happened after. One of the members pulled me to the side, you know, the way people move when they're carrying a message they know they have to deliver to you. And she said, "Brother Joseph, I feel God telling me to tell you that you are going to put the gospel back into gospel music." At the time, I was in the middle of questioning everything about the system I'd grown up in. Not challenging it yet, just circling it, feeling the edges of it. And I was already thinking past gospel music as a genre. I didn't want to be labeled as a gospel artist. I always understood myself as an artist who could sing gospel music. Those aren't the same thing. So, when she said it, I received it in the way you receive something you don't yet have the space to hold. I filed it somewhere and I kept it moving, right on up to New York City, graduate school, NYU, a program saturated with music theater, opera, the European canon. It's one of those institutions that decide what counts as a serious music genre or a musical form, what counts as legacy worth preserving, and what counts as worth the room. And I was the only black man in it. When it came time for my dissertation, I didn't reach toward the canon they'd handed me. I reached back toward something else, something I'd been carrying since before I had language for it. I wrote about the spiritual, about what it actually was, about what it was doing underneath what it looked like it was doing. The day I presented it, I stood in front of a small room of white faculty and white students, people who knew the spirituals, who had sung them, studied them, could place them in a timeline. They had the knowledge. What they didn't have was the ground it came from. And I remember the feeling in my body as I spoke and performed one of them. The recognition that I wasn't translating this for myself. I was remembering it in real time. And the remembering gave me an authority the institution hadn't granted me and couldn't take away, because it didn't come from the institution. It came from a church in my childhood. My mother's voice, from February evenings watching Black Hollywood films with my sisters, and from a woman who pulled me aside after a solo and said something I wasn't ready to receive yet. But I understand it now. Putting the gospel back into gospel music didn't mean returning to a genre. It doesn't even mean going back to the church container. It just means recovering what the container was always too small to hold. It's the original thing, the root thing, the thing that was never just worship, the thing that was always also liberation. The spiritual wasn't simply worship. It was navigational intelligence. Before the first spiritual was ever sung on American soil, there was always sound in the trees, the plants, the soil, the skies. That, in and of itself, is a kind of music that was doing what all music at its deepest level has always done. It held the relationship between a people, their understanding of existence, and whatever force was understood to move through both. The people who were taken away from this understanding, and I use taken away deliberately because the sanitized language of history has a way of managing the weight of what actually happened, and they did not arrive here empty. They arrived with cosmologies, with rhythmic systems sophisticated enough to map the relationship between human movement and divine order, with an understanding that sound was an intelligent structure. Sound was how you stayed in coherence with something larger than yourself. That is what was taken away onto those transatlantic ships alongside the people. And that is what the colonial crusades immediately felt it needed to replace. The introduction of Christianity to the enslaved population was not primarily a spiritual crusade, it was a structural decision. The logic was clean, as colonial logic tends to be when it's working. In other words, they saw a people with their own intact cosmology as a people with their own source of authority, their own internal organizing principle, replace the cosmology and you replace the authority. Install a God who rewards obedience, who locates freedom in the afterlife rather than the present moment, who makes suffering a symbol of divine will. And then the result is you have a management system that the managed population will maintain themselves. The hymn was the delivery mechanism. Eurocentric hymns, taught to enslaved Africans as an act of supposed civilization, carried embedded instructions about how to relate to power, to suffering, to the body, and to time itself. Wait, endure. Your reward is coming, but it's not here on earth. Submit to earthly authority because heavenly authority has ordained it. The music was the medicine, and the medicine was designed to produce a specific condition. What the colonial crusade did not fully account for was what happens when they hand a coded form of intelligence to a people who understand sound at a level that they didn't. The enslaved Africans took the hymns and they recoded them. What we now call the Negro spiritual looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was supposed to be. Enslaved people worshiping, finding comfort in faith, singing about God and heaven and deliverance. The overseers heard it and heard compliance. It looked like the medicine was working. What was actually moving through those songs was something else entirely. Swing low, sweet chariot. It was not a meditation on death in heaven. It was coordinates. The chariot was the network. Coming for to carry me home meant there were people coming. A route was open, and home was north. Follow the drinking gourd was a star map. The drinking gourd was the Big Dipper. The song was navigation instructions encoded in melody. It was a kind of instructions that could be sung openly, in plain sight, in front of the people you were escaping from, because they had already decided the song was only worship. Wade in the water carried instructions to move through rivers and streams, to break the trail for dogs tracking escape routes. The spiritual was a communication navigational system. Google Maps, Waze, MapQuest could never. These songs were the most sophisticated resistance structures available inside conditions of total surveillance and total constraint. And it was hiding in the one place the colonial crusade had decided to look away from, because it believed it had already filled that place with something it controlled. But the enslaved people had taken the container, hollowed it out, and filled it with internal liberation. This is the part of the story that tends to get softened in the retelling, because the version that's easier to hold for everyone, across lines of race and faith and history, is the version where suffering people found God, and God gave them strength to endure. That version is not entirely wrong. Something real was moving through those songs. The aliveness I felt as a child hearing my mom sing was not manufactured. The anointing was not nothing, but endurance and liberation are not the same movement. And the spiritual, in its original form, was not asking people to endure. It was an invitation to move, which means something important about what happened next. If it was a people using the imposed container to encode and transmit the intelligence of their own liberation, then the questions worth sitting with are, at what point did the container get reclaimed? At what point Did the navigational intelligence that was moving people toward freedom become the navigational intelligence that was keeping them inside the same system? At what point did the medicine that was supposed to wake them up become the thing that was helping them sleep?